true time management and what I like to talk about is sustainable productivity. It's not so much about can I do everything on my plate, but instead it's slowing down and saying, what are the things that are going to move the needle and making time for those things? It's not usually achieved by just getting more efficient or productive.
Oftentimes when we're doing any work, it's very difficult to win over the hearts and the minds of people to say, test out this new theory, this model, this tactic. And I always want to encourage leaders to do it and see if they get a different result. I'm so excited to have Connor here. As I say, he is a thought leader in the space of making time for what matters most. The other thing about Connor and his current life, which I really want to unpack, because we talk about high performers, right? You usually have a lot on your plates. Is that fair to say? You've a lot of things you need to do. Connor's like that. He's a high performer. His background, he spent time in Google, and I'll maybe create some space for you to share a little bit more about yourself. But he also just became a parent for the first time. So I'm so curious if he's still able to make time for what matters most. Is it going all right in terms of your making time for what matters?
It's never been more difficult, but I can confirm that sleeping in a hotel room away from a crying baby for one night, I'm feeling fantastic today. So
look, I'm really excited to get into this because, as I say, you do inspire me to think more intentionally about where I spend my time and my energy. The topic is make time for what matters most. Let's put it in the context of high performance. How does this sit for the folks here in the room and stream it in online?
Well, thanks for having me. Really appreciate the invitation. I mean, I think the high performance is dependent on what you do with your limited time and your limited energy. And so I think the question only becomes bigger and more important as you reach up into those levels of your performance is, am I focusing on the things that truly matter? Because in this world, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be every day asking for your attention. And I think as you transcend your levels of leadership, that, your answer to what is most important to me today, what is it in this moment? That's an important question to ask.
Thank you for setting the context. I think it is absolutely prevalent for the folks here. Your first point, Connor, is managing your time is not about productivity.
Yes, the book Make Time and the framework that I teach, it falls under this banner of sort of time management and productivity. And I think when people hear those terms, a lot of the times they think about efficiency and how can I get more done and how can I become more productive? And I think that strategy works at some level. So I started my career at Google. I was sharing this with somebody earlier that I came in sort of through the back door, meaning I got hired a non-traditional way, and I had a lot of imposter syndrome when I was there. Everyone was like Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and I didn't have the pedigree. So I turned to a lot of this productivity advice so I could fit in with my peers, so I could try and stand out. And I think it works because you become really good at being super responsive. And I got really organized and really fast at cleaning out my emails. And I was in every meeting and my calendars were packed and I was doing and doing and doing. But at a certain point, I just realized I was just a reaction machine. And so I think true time management and what I like to talk about is sustainable productivity. It's not so much about can I do everything on my plate, because that's just an infinite game and you'll never win it. But instead, it's slowing down and really getting to the heart of the matter and saying, what are the things that are going to move the needle, whether that's in the business, in your job, but also in your personal life, the things that I truly care about. And making time for those things, it's not usually achieved by just getting more efficient or productive.
So in a world full of competing demands, right? You're a new parent, you're running your business, you're doing a bunch of stuff, you're traveling, and lots of folks here will have a lot on their plate. How does one figure out what matters most in order to be more intentional about that?
It's a deep question, right? You're like, what matters most, Connor? What's the meaning of life? We could spend all afternoon doing that. But like one exercise that I teach and we love, and I would love to send a video from one of our courses of Jake and John explaining this, is called stack rank your life. Because I do think that there are great exercises about what are my values, what's my vision for the future, what are my 3 and 5 year goals. But honestly, I think in the day to day, when you're like running fast, you're leading a team, you're being a parent, I like something that's much scrappier and to the point. So this is literally a piece of paper, 10 minutes on the clock, everything that's on my list. What are my projects? What are the things? We stack rank them. So we go, what do I think is most important, 1 to 10? You set a timer, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you go, where am I spending my time right now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you look at that piece of paper, and that alone helps me see it externalizes that. And I go, okay, what's super important to me right now is writing the newsletter, creating the course, and spending time with my kids. Now, where am I spending my time? I'm spending my time dealing with this problem with a client. I'm answering emails all the time. I'm on LinkedIn all day. Okay, what has to change? And then we start planning our week and we start thinking, what are the highlights? What do I want to make time for? So honestly, I don't think figuring it out has to be this huge process because it changes all the time. So I do stack rank your life, every couple of months. And if I look back in mine from 2 months ago, it's totally changed. And that was always my experience at Google. It's like you set these big goals at the beginning of the year, and then 4 months into the year, you look back and you're like, well, those are irrelevant. So I think in this day and age, things are moving so fast that having moments where you can just pause, you don't need all day, you need 15 minutes, you need a piece of paper and a pen, and to say, okay, what's most important? How can I actually start today? And not planning some ideal future when your calendar is clear to actually start working on those things. But I'm a big believer in like, let's do it now. So that's an exercise that I personally, I find a lot of value in. And every time I teach it, people are like, it's just so obvious. It's staring them in the face. And they're like, I know what's important. It's this.
Sounds terrifying.
It is there's a lot of anxiety. So after I teach that one, like slide right after, it's just, let's all take a deep breath. Because it is in today's world, I mean, the list is for most of us. If you give people an hour, then that's like 12 pages. So you have to time bound it.
Well, that's what I like about that exercise, that you're putting two lists, if I understood correctly. You're saying what's most important, where you spend your time, and you can see the discrepancy,
Yeah.
right? And I think those of us that are, especially those folks that are performing at a high level, I suspect you're probably doing some of this intuitively. Although I like the time-bound nature of it, and you see the discrepancy, you say, well, I say I care about this, and this is a priority, but actually I'm spending all my time on this other thing.
Yeah, exactly.
What for you, Connor, has come out of that in your most recent ones? Not to encourage too much vulnerability, but like what sort of things have come out for you in the last sort of 6 months, a year, that you realized I'm spending a lot of time in this and I need to make a shift?
Yeah. I mean, my baby's 4, almost 5 months old. So that has like really being honest with myself about it. I like to think of my life in terms of like seasons or eras, as T Swift says. And it's like, you don't have to, what I wanted to do at the start of this year versus how I want to spend my time now is very different. So I think I got really honest and I said, this time will be gone very, very soon. And so I looked and I thought, I'm still spending a lot of time with clients, and like we're pitching work, we're designing proposals, we're doing a lot of stuff like that. Plus I'm writing the Make Time newsletter. We're writing a lot on LinkedIn. We're creating a public course. And I just looked and I said, we've got a full calendar already. Like there doesn't need to be more sales, more business development, more of this stuff. And so I just had to look at that. And honestly, I like people. I love the clients I work with. So it's super difficult for me to just look at that and just say, hey, right now, what's gonna have to drop is like more workshops, more sessions with clients, like just for now. And we have other people that can do those. But for me, that's got to go. And that's but looking at this at Stack Rank and just being like, the long-term projects plus time with my kid, and then just being honest with myself, it gives you that clarity. And I think that's what's lacking for a lot of people that I work with is we're so busy. We call this the busy bandwagon. It's like this culture we live in where it's just like, do. You said earlier, it's like the calendar is just back to back, and slowing down and just taking a minute and looking, okay, you get that clarity. And then from that clarity, I find the action kind of flows, and having those conversations. And not a single client that I was talking with that I said, I'm not going to do anything other than we've got on the calendar for the rest of the year. They were all like, great, like fantastic, spend time with the family. Like if we have other stuff, we can talk to some of the other teachers, and you're kind of like, all right, great. So it's more in the head. You freak out a little bit, like what are people going to say? And then people tend to respond quite well.
Yeah, that's great advocacy for testing this because yeah, usually it's more as you say in our heads. We're like, oh, if I say this and then that, maybe actually touches on some of the stuff we were just chatting about around maybe the anxiety of it. When in reality, most folks and great clients, shout out to TravelPerk, are
Whoop.
very understanding of changing things and changing priorities. I am thinking about this group though, Connor, and I'm thinking about the experience they would go through when they do this activity themselves, which I hope you do from the inspiration guide. And they go through it, they go to their manager and they say, it turns out I'm spending time in these things and I don't think that's a priority for me. What advice do you give to the high performers at TravelPerk when it comes to doing this activity and then taking it forward to their leadership team and sort of enacting change in their lives?
Yeah, it's not an easy conversation, but what I often hear when we coach people to do this, and we work a lot with teams, so the managers there and they understand, but often individuals come and they go have this conversation, is a lot of times the manager isn't 100% clear on everything that you're doing. So there's just like in knowledge work and like what we do with we're working with our minds on our hands, most of us. It's like there's so many different things that comprise like a day in our life and the things that we have to do. And so there sometimes is already some aha moments when you sit down, you go, hey, I'm right now, like we said, these are the three big priorities for the year. And I looked at my calendar for the last 2 weeks and I came up with 17 different things that I'm working on. And what I'm feeling is the top three things, they really need my focus and my energy. And that's a limited resource. And I'm wondering, is there anything on this 17, this list of 17 things that might not be as important than these three? And what I'm doing there is I'm asking questions. I'm not saying, hey, like, I don't want to do this anymore. It's a waste of my time. So I'm done doing this. And your manager's like, well, it's part of your job. It's like, no, it's having that conversation. And oftentimes the manager themselves is twice as stressed as the person they're managing because they have their job, then they're managing the team. And so they also, I think, see the benefit in doing this. And for them, it's sometimes a wake up call. They're like, oh, right, this is something I need to be doing because I'm doing 15 other things that aren't so important. And then it's not a no forever. So I'm not saying like, let's not do this ever again for the rest of my life. Like, no, but saying over the next couple of weeks, could we run an experiment? Like, could I just push these things for a couple of weeks? And can I block an hour a day for the next 2 weeks just to work on either this or that? And let's check back in and see for 2 weeks how it goes. When that happens, then it really de-risks the conversation because it's like, okay, this is not a no forever. Let's try it out. You're going to circle back with me so that I don't have to check in. And so it's like the responsibility is on you. And then what happens? Well, if you use that time well, you bring good energy to it, you focus on it, you make big progress. And oftentimes when you look back on like a quarter or a year, you hardly remember like 99% of what you did. It's usually those one or two, three things that are really the most important. So keeping that frame in mind and being like in the day to day, everything feels important. And that's what I don't like about Slack and about email, about it's just everything looks equally important. So sometimes stepping out and having those conversations is important. But yeah, that's my advice. It's not an easy one, but it's been trying to just be open, lead with curiosity, ask questions, show your manager what you're working on, frame it as an experiment, and see how that goes.
One of the things that I did, I remember earlier in my career, I used to be responsible for a newsletter. Well, those are things, I mean, they're still things. You've got a great newsletter, obviously.
Please subscribe.
Yeah, absolutely. Please subscribe to Connor's newsletter. But I was doing one in work and I was responsible for this. I think it was weekly newsletter. And I think at the time I had a little bit of data that showed that not a whole lot of people were reading it. And it took me 2-3 hours a week. And I remember saying to my manager, like you suggested, like, let me experiment. Let's see if we don't do the newsletter for a week or two or three. I think we did a 4-week test. Let's see if anybody reaches out and complains. If anybody says, I really miss the newsletter, Tony. Nobody got in touch. And I saved like several hours a week. And getting, 8 hours in a month back was huge for me, right? And I think we find ourselves in this busy work that's not really productive or adding value. So I love this collaborative approach that you're taking. When did you figure out that this quest for productivity was futile? You were never going to achieve it. Was there a role that you had in Google perhaps where you were like, oh, I'm just constantly being that, I think you called it a reaction machine?
Yeah. And I don't know if there's folks here who are into the genre of productivity and time management or who read those books or trying to like into self-development. So I haven't even today, like I haven't fully let go of it. I find myself, I'm like, ooh, like look at this great little course on how to use AI to supercharge my productivity. And then I'm like, I'm just distracting myself from what's most important again. But yeah, I started at Google. I was in New York and then San Francisco, and I had an amazing opportunity to move to London and run marketing for a startup space. Google has one in Spain and in Madrid actually, and we were kind of creating these communities to help startup ecosystems grow. And I got there, there's 20,000 members. It's an like open source building. We have 50 events a week. I'm managing the social media channels. Plus I'm collaborating with not just my campus, but the campus in Madrid, the one in Warsaw, the one in Seoul, the one in Sao Paulo. And I just ran right into a brick wall of burnout because I was still in that mode of like, I can do everything if I just get more efficient. I just drink some more espresso and I just go after it. And yeah, I suffered, honestly. Like I was nights and weekends, I was pushing myself so hard. I was giving up time that I really wanted to spend, friends with my girlfriend at the time, working out. Like I was sacrificing all of that. And that Make Time, I had known the guys, Jake and John, who wrote it. The book came out about a year or two after I had and moved to London. And it's just a different approach. And it really kind of caught me at the right moment. And it asked me that question of like, what is really the most important? And like, how much of what you're doing is just on autopilot. And so that was a transformation for me. It wasn't overnight the next day, but it was weeks and months and trial and error and putting this into practice. And it changed my life in many ways. And I just became, started being evangelizing at Google. I was teaching teams at Google. And then people were asking me to teach other teams. And that's kind of what brought me here today is because as I talked to more people, everyone felt the same things. They were pushing so hard, they were burning out. So yeah, that was really where I came into contact with this, but there's still parts of me that are like, yeah, could I still get more productive? And then I have to rewind myself and remind and come back to the purpose.
I like that. It's funny because you think about having a relationship with Connor. If he's like, I don't want to hang out with you today, you're not in my list. That hasn't happened yet, but I suspect in the future. Well, look, we're going to pivot now into your second point. I guess the sub point that I like about this one, and again, you're sort of talking about it within the environment, the context is that it's really hard. So talk to us about your second point around we spend most of our time by default and why is that? Why does that happen? And why is it so hard to kind of navigate?
Yeah. I mean, this is an insight. So, Tony and I, ex-Googlers, Jake and John, who wrote the book, Googlers, they were product designers. And so they were really in the weeds building some of the great Google apps like Gmail and YouTube. And I mean, if you just ask yourself, like, what's my relationship like with my phone? Like, what's my relationship like with my email and my Slack? Like, do I find myself getting kind of pulled into these things more than I would like to? I think majority of us probably would answer, yeah, like sometimes it feels irresistible. And so defaults are as I mentioned before, it's kind of the way things are. And I'm obsessed with defaults, especially when it comes to technology. Because in the last 10 or 15 years, as we've all gotten smartphones, as we've, brought apps onto these phones, and as these apps have become better and more exciting and more fun, it turns out that our desires of how we want to spend our time, they often get sucked into these sort of infinity pools. So these are like social media, games, news, all of these apps that have just an infinite amount of sort of content for us. And seeing this from the inside out at Google, I really realized that if you don't proactively start to guard your attention from these things, it's a really difficult fight to win because there's just so many people on the other side of that app making that algorithm so fun, so interesting. And
Okay,
so
you're absolutely bringing the mood down here. So, so, so these are the challenges. I think it's resonating. Is that fair to say? We get it, right? We're all sucked into our devices and our apps and phones. I'm so curious to hear from you. How do we avoid it? How do we get out of those infinity pools that are so well designed to keep us hooked that they are irresistible? And again, many of us will fall into that trap. What things can we do around the technology space? And then I will be asking a little bit more about the people side
for
too.
sure, for sure. So the good news is that most of the defaults that are around us are, uh, in some sense, accidental, but a lot of these defaults they are customizable to your needs. So it's like the biggest thing that I've learned is when you want to change your relationship with technology, you can't rely on willpower. So willpower is it's a tantalizing idea, and for like the last 30 or 40 years, as we've studied it more, the idea itself has sort of withered away. And willpower is this feeling like I'm just gonna have self-control. And it's like I'm just gonna avoid eating that pint of ice cream in my freezer tonight. Or I'll just stop scrolling Instagram after 20 minutes. But willpower is not the way out. So what we need to do is bring back friction into that experience. And that's really the key. And so when it comes to something as simple as, maybe you're a bit addicted to your email. Well, my first recommendation would be if you have email on your phone, don't. Like take the app off your phone because you will find yourself with so much more time, so much more sort of mental clarity. You have access to email on your computer. You're probably at your computer for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. So we can make simple default shifts like that. Okay, you work at your computer all the time, but you're still checking email. I use tools. One of them is called Freedom. You set a timer. It locks me out of email for 45 minutes, for an hour, for 75 minutes. It's one click of a button, but these are the types of ways that you can start to put a little bit of friction in between you and that experience. I know a lot of creative people, and they say, look, after reading Make Time, I decided I have a cafe that I go to where I don't connect to the Wi-Fi and I leave my phone at home and I go there to write, create, and think. And it sounds kind of crazy, but I think these types of crazy or geeky sort of tactics are what's needed in this world today, because I think most of us are really struggling with that digital addiction and there's so much going on. So whenever you're struggling to change a behavior and it's with you all the time, the key is like, how do I add just a little bit more friction back into the experience? Deleting the app, logging out, blocking it, going to other place. We have a ton of tactics on that.
Connor could talk for weeks on this stuff if you can't tell already. So if I cut you off, he knows we've got good psychological safety. We are going to pivot into your third point, which is all around treating each day like an experiment. You mentioned this already as a way to, I think you called it de-risk and give your manager, for example, confidence. Talk us through a little bit more about your thinking around this.
Yes. So I should just quickly explain. So Make Time is a framework, 4 steps: highlight, laser, energize, and reflect. So our big mission is to help people slow down, pick one highlight every day. So that's the one big thing that we protect and prioritize amongst everything else. And that gives your day clarity and focus. And at the end of the day, if everything else goes to crap, but you got your highlight done, it's a win. It's a fantastic tactic. The second is laser. That's all we've been talking about. It's like, how do I stay focused? The third step is energize, which is taking care of the body, because can't think, you can't be creative without that. And the final step is this reflect bit, which we really believe like you got to have this experimental mindset. There's so much advice out there. I've given you a ton of advice and it's like, okay, I'm just going to take what Connor says and like, I'll just treat it like gospel. I'll do it. But the only way to know if it works is to try it out for yourself. So we really try to think of ourselves as like scientists in our own life. And it's like, I'm just going to try. Like, I'm going to try to spend 1 hour in the morning without checking my phone or checking email. I'm going to do it for 2 days. And then at the end of the day, I'm going to go, what was that like? Did that serve me? Was it nice? Did something go wrong at work and it put me in a bind? That daily attitude of experimentation, you can do it yourself, you can do it with a team, I think is the key because it makes it fun, it de-risks it, and it makes it personal. It's that self-awareness of being like, what works for me? How do I work best? When's the best time? So I think it's super important.
I love this experimentation thing. Oftentimes when we're doing any work with TravelPerk or any of our other organizations, it's very difficult to win over the hearts and the minds of people to say, try this new thing, test out this new theory, this model, this tactic. And I always want to encourage individuals and especially leaders to do it and see if they get a different result because the results speak for themselves. If you feel more energized after that sunrise dip, which we'll do tomorrow, I promise, then you're more likely to go, okay, I'm going to do this again. Now, a couple of things, other things that I want to call out, because we talked about experimentation, and I'm really eager for this group and the folks online and those listening to do is this meeting thing, because I think you and I are big fans of Bruce Daisley's work. He's got another incredible newsletter with great insights into workplace culture. He talks about or shared research into reducing meetings and the impact it has on stress, a feeling of autonomy, all positive things. What advice would you give to folks when they get into their calendar after this and go, heck yeah, I'm going to go and delete some meetings?
Delete meetings. That's my first advice. I mean, I spend a lot of time with my clients on this because I think especially as we've gone more hybrid and remote, and I work with a lot of traditional companies like L'Oreal, and meetings are, I mean, there are parts of them that are great when it's about connection, collaboration, decision making, but um, what I like to do is instead of just thinking about reducing or cutting things out, just in general, when I'm trying to change habits and behaviors, I like to think about what do I want to do first. So what I would encourage you is before you cancel meetings to say, I got to have 60, maybe 90 minutes, depending on your role, 60 minutes minimum per day that I'm going to give to myself to focus on one thing that's really important. That's your highlight. So like that's table stakes for a really great day for me, 1 hour. Then I usually say, I got to have probably an hour to 75 minutes of like admin time. I'm usually going to put that in the afternoon. And that's when I'm going to do a bunch of the catch up. I'm going to look at my pings and look at my chats and reply to emails. I might catch some emails throughout the day, but that's going to be the time when I kind of bulk go through it. And then I'm going to make sure I'm energizing. So I'm going to make sure that after I do that big focus block, I go for a walk, I do some breath work, I have a coffee with a friend. I'm going to make sure I have some time for lunch. I'm going to build in those things. Like that's a simple day for me. Like what's my highlight? What's my admin time? Do I have a few moments to take breaks and energize? And then I'm going to allow the meetings to happen. Then I'm going to say, okay, let's figure out where these meetings are going to go. Because if you try to work it the other way around and just say, I'll accept every meeting that's on my calendar and treat it as I can't move these things and then try to build these things in, it's much more difficult. But it is a challenge. And I think you don't want to go at it alone. Like to be a lone wolf trying to fight this is really difficult. So have the conversation with your team and do an audit and sit down once a quarter and say, all right, like let's look, what are all these meetings? Who's in them? What's the purpose? Does it need to be 60? Could it be 30? Does it need to be 30? Could it be 15? And do that together. But start with build the day that you want slowly over time. And then I think allow the meetings. And, you got to move things around and be flexible.
One of the things that Connor mentioned there that I think is super useful is, and I don't know for the rest of you folks, but I used to struggle with the mornings, but I've now come to realize that that's where I get my best work done. And I think one of your rituals around focus in the morning, get the stuff that you care about, that deep thinking, that work before you get derailed by the distractions is really useful. How might the world change if we make time for what matters most?
When I work with people one-to-one and we sit down and I ask them and we do stack rank your life and they tell me, these are the things that really matter to me. And you have that conversation, you see someone come alive, like that to me is what it's all about. I think it doesn't have to be something at work. Make time can be applied to all your life. But I honestly feel if more people ask themselves at the start of every day, like, what do I want to be the bright spot of my day? right? Do I want to make time for a swim in the ocean in the morning? Do I want to crush a spreadsheet for finance and close this quarter out, whatever, make it really strong? Do I want to have a really collaborative meeting with my team and put into practice all the introversion, meeting tactics that I learned today? And then you make that happen, living with that intention and kind of aligning your day with those things, it would bring more of us alive. And I think that's really what the world needs, is people to feel aligned with their purpose, to feel energized by what they're doing. And I think we can help each other do it.
I love that. Feeling inspired. We're making time for what matters most. This has been fantastic. Let's give a round of applause to Connor Swenson.
Thanks, everyone.